Hey guys, welcome to the video, welcome to my channel, welcome to the basement. This is part 2 of my lower control arm design in fabrication. Although this one really, the design I covered in part 1, this one's going to be all about the fabrication. In part 1, I made the templates, plasma cut, and did some grinding on the pieces. What I've done so far with that is I've taken the pieces, I washed them in the sink. The reason I wash them in the sink is, number one, the metal that I'm using I got from the scrapyard, so it's just a little bit dirty. Plus, from the plasma cutting and the grinding, it's a little bit dirty. So I cleaned it in the sink just using sandpaper and some wet sanding, dried everything up. Then I took my templates. The templates that I was using for the plasma cutting have notes on them, and they have break lines that I transferred from the three-dimensional template that I made, or the prototype, whatever you want to call it. I transferred those notes to the metal with a paint pen, and then I transferred the layout lines with a Sharpie. Now the next thing I'm going to do is get my spindle out of here, clean up the surface here, and put my jig on the table. Now this is essentially the same jig that I had built a while back for the flat tubular lower control arm. The boxed control arm that I'm making follows the same dimensions, so I built this new template using the same layout lines that I had originally put on there. And then it's kind of a three-dimensional jig because I've got a break line here and it just comes up, and this has the 6 inches that this has in it right here. So you can take this piece and essentially set it right in there. It doesn't fit perfectly in there because I added these tabs, but you get the picture. It sits right in there and it rides all the way up here, and then the two pieces back here actually hold the round piece of the bushings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this jig to build the passenger side control arm. So the first thing I did is I took the bottom piece and I gave it a little bit of a break here, and I'll show you the break on when I break some other pieces. And I set it down where it needs to go on my jig. This is kind of, I'm not going to say the most important part, but in order to completely facilitate this jig, meaning so that this jig can hold everything where it needs to be, I need to get this bottom piece in here, and I need to get it secured down so that I can set pieces on here and tack everything in place with this where it needs to be, because this is going to be true to my layout lines for like the front and the offset, and it's going to have the bushings back here, and once I start tacking things together I want that to all stay consistent. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to screw this bottom piece down to the jig so that it can't really move around at all. For something like this, that's the only way I've found to be able to accurately hold this in place. And then when I'm all done welding this up, I'll just plug weld these holes that these screws go into. So that's no big deal. Alright, now I got the bottom plate where it needs to be. I'm going to keep this screwed down here until I have the side plates and the top piece tacked on. When I have everything tacked, then I'll take it all apart, and then I'll solid weld it. At that point, it'll essentially be off of the jig. When I tack weld this, I'm going to take it up. I have to do my welding in the garage, so what I'm going to do is get to a point that I'm going to carry this whole thing upstairs. I'm going to TIG what I can. I'm going to take it back downstairs, form more pieces, size things up, take it back upstairs. A little bit of a nuisance, but that's the only way I can get it tacked and do the nice fabrication down here. This is where my brake is and the grinders and all that. I'm going to tack it with my flux core MIG welder. However, I'm not going to solid weld it with that because the flux core is not as strong as like just a regular MIG or a TIG welder, and this piece needs to be extremely strong. So once I have this tacked, I'm going to put all the tacks on the inside. When I do my solid weld, I'll do that from the outside, and I'm going to do that with the TIG. What I've done up here is, if you can see, I've marked the centers of where I want the tubes to be for the bushings, and this matches my layout, which is 14¼ inches. Now I've got a tube that's running through these just because that's going to help hold these a little bit straight while I work on these tacks. So with this first one, I just make sure that this line represents the center line of this bushing, or the bushing collar, and just make sure that it's in line with the little line on my jig here. And then just holding it in place with this clamp. Double check your distance. That should be roughly 14¼ which it is. Now I already prefabbed a couple of pieces. This piece is going to go here just like this. I put some holes on the end because that's going to be inside the control arm, and I don't need, you know, all that strength. So this is a 3/16 thick piece, so I put some holes where it's going to be inside just to lighten it up a little bit. And what's going to happen is this goes straight up and down, so I will clamp this just like you see it here. And I will take that upstairs, and that's actually going to be the very first piece that I tack, because having a little bit of structure on the side here will help me lay out these side pieces. So I'm going to tack that. This is a 3/16 piece that's going to go in the front right there. So when I get upstairs, I will tack that in place as well. Then I'm going to come back downstairs, and I'm going to take these pieces off. I don't need these anymore because this piece of metal is bolted down, so I don't need these to hold it into place. The reason I'm going to take these off is when I start working on these side pieces, they'll be in my way because I'm not going to have these pieces sitting directly on top of this piece. Let me give you an example. If this is the bottom plate, I don't want these to sit on top of it like that. I want to have it like that so that they both overlap a little bit, and then I can get a much better weld down in there. If I weld it with one sitting on top of the other, that's not going to be a great weld. If I split the seam a little bit and have them both overlap a little bit, that'll be a much better weld. So in order to do that, I need these pieces out of the way. Alright, now I've gone up to the garage. I tacked this piece on. This one I did a little bit more than tack. This one I would say I stitched it. Now I'm going to take all three of these off. Now with those side pieces off, I can start focusing on exactly how this piece is going to set on there. I'm just going to set it up so that kind of cradles the edge a little bit, and I'll just probably I mean, obviously these pieces are not going to fit on here perfectly, so I'm going to grind a little bit and snip a little bit to get this exactly where I want it. But I'm going to do this side, the other side, and then I'll take those up to the garage and I'll tack those on in place, and then I'll do these inside pieces. Okay, so now I've made a little forward progress. I brought this back up to the garage, and I've tack welded this piece and this piece on So they're ready to go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these pieces. This is, let's see, rear, bottom. So we're going to take these pieces, and they need to fit somewhere in here. So we need to start sizing them up and see what we need to grind and file. First thing that we need to do is take it over to the brake and break this up. So I just put it in there up to the line, pinch it down, break it a little bit. I don't know exactly how far to go, so I'm just going to go a little bit and then test it. You don't have to have a brake for this either. If I didn't have the brake, I could do this just as well in a vise. Now if I come out here and try it, it's immediately showing me two things. Number one, this angle is a little bit off, so I'll need to clean that up. And number two, I need to do a little bit of work on where it comes in contact with the tube there. So looks like I need to open this up a little bit here and a little bit there. So let's do that first. Alright, that looks like it fits on there pretty good. That's getting better, but I still need to take more out down here. Alright. Okay, so I'm pretty good with how that's fitting in. I need to take in on the bottom. Then I'll take this over to the disc sander. Alright, so as I get it closer, you just got to go little bit by little bit until you get it exactly where you want it. But now that I'm getting closer, I can see that I broke this a little bit too much, so I'm going to put it in the vise and just pinch it down a little bit. Now it's not broke enough, but that's pretty common when I try and take some break out for me to take too much. So I'm just going to give this a little kick. Okay, I think that's pretty good. It's a little bit too tall up here, and it's still a little bit too long. I'd rather it be a little bit too short, because when I weld it, things are going to distort a little bit, and that'll give me a little bit of room. And if there's a little tiny gap and it fits in there nicely, that'll be easier to work with. Getting close, but still a little bit too long still. Okay, I think that's close enough. And when I say close enough, what that means is some of this, like this is actually going and it bows this way a little bit, and I need to correct that. But you can correct those things when you're tacking it. I'll take this thing upstairs and tack these in place. Okay, now I've got all 4 of the plates tacked in place. They all went pretty good. I'm real happy with them. However, the next step that I like to do in a process like this, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put the top plate on here. And we need to have all 4 of these essentially at the same height. Otherwise, when you put your top piece on here, you can clamp it down and you can get all that to work, but this is going to be the top plate. It's going to be the portion that people see the most, and you don't want that to be wavy or anything like that. So typically what I do is I'll run a level across here, and I'll just take a grinder and I'll smooth down all the high spots. It doesn't have to be perfect at all, but you should have it within, I'd say, a 1/16 of an inch. I'm just going to chase it down with the level, and when I notice it starts getting high, I'm just going to, trim it down with the grinder. Alright, so now we're back down in the basement. We've got all of our pieces tacked in place, and as you just saw, we ran a grinder across the top to kind of smooth everything out and get it down to the same elevation so it's ready for our top plate. Now, the next thing I have to do is take my screws out, because obviously I can't have the screws in there while I put this top plate on. I can't put my side blocks on because those won't fit anymore because I've got these side panels on here. But I can still put the front piece on because the dimensions on this one is critical. So when I tacked this one on, I actually tacked it on top of this piece. So the next thing we need to do is fit this to fit on here. So I'm going to take this over to the brake, and I'm going to break this up so that I can get this to sit on here flat and see how all of our dimensions look. Okay, so that's pretty good for the brake. I'm good with that. I'm sizing it up in the front here because remember, this is one of the critical pieces. This is where these tabs are going to go, and they're going to connect to the spindle. So I want everything to be nice and true right there. So I'm going to start this piece right here. So that's a good fit right there. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, and you can see I purposely left these top plates a little bit long because I would rather trim some off than have it be too short. So I'm going to see how much I need to cut off here. It looks like I need to cut off probably 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to lop that off and then see how she fits. So I'm going to go set the GoPro up so you can watch some of the tigging. We'll do that. When I get the top tigged, then I'm going to take this out of the jig and I'm going to flip it upside down, and then I'm going to TIG the bottom piece because all I've done so far is just tack it on the inside with the flux core. So let's go upstairs and tack her in place. What I've done so far is this front plate, this is that 3/16 plate. I solid welded it on the edges here because those tabs are going to get welded onto here. And then I've ground that smooth with the flapper wheel on my grinder. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to set it back in the jig. And then I'll show you how my jig clamps onto the tabs. I've taken my 2 brackets and I've taken the high misalignment spacers out of the uniball, and I've got a bolt going through there, and that's nice and tight. So this is holding this nice and straight. So then I just take this whole assembly, set it down onto the jig, and then this plate goes on here with lag bolts, and you just snug it down. Put some pressure on it so that you hold it in place. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a real healthy tack right on the top on both sides. I'm not going to do anything on the side yet, because if I do anything on the side, it's going to have a tendency to want to pull one way or the other. If I do a nice healthy tack on the top, both sides, then I can unbolt this. It'll hold itself in position, and then I can flip it, and I can do a heavy tack on the other sides, and then I can come back and I'll probably put a tack on either side just to hold it in place, but it'll be plenty solid for mocking up at that point. Well, that's it. I'm exhausted. I've been working on this damn thing for 3 days, whenever I can. I mean, I haven't been working on it all day, but I've been working on it a lot. Hopefully you can tell from this why I initially was trying to make the tubular control arms, because in my opinion, tubular control arms are way easier to make than boxed control arms. Now, boxed control arms are nice because you can lay them out very specifically to exactly the dimensions that you need. So that's nice. And I think probably all in all, the boxed control arms are stronger than tubular control arms. Everything came out pretty good. And then you just saw me weld on my tabs here with my little jig, and that went well. So I'm not going to do any solid welding on this yet. I'm not going to do anything else from here because this is still, let's call it research and development. I'm not even 100% sure if this is going to be the control arm I use or not. I hope it is, because I've got an insane amount of time in on this. I do have this in my shared folder so that if you guys want it, you want to trace it, copy it, make the same arm, modify it, whatever, I'll put it in the shared folder. But either way, that's it for part 2. This is going to be a long video. I'll try and compress it as much as I can, but I'm also trying to give you guys important information for making these boxed control arms. So as always, thanks for watching the video. I hope it's helping you with whatever project you guys are working on. And I hope to see you on the next video. Take care.